Welcome back to another episode of Quick Review. Today we're talking about Final Fantasy IX, a game with a whole bunch of charm, a great story, and great characters that all adds up to just a great time. And it's a very, very fun game that I would recommend to anybody. Now, let's start with the obvious. It is a Final Fantasy game. Of course, you have those classic Final Fantasy uh, callbacks and references because this was the last game on the PS1 era before the series took a major shift into PS2 era, modern games with Final Fantasy X, including like voice acting and like fully like fleshed out models and characters in general. And Final Fantasy game was the last of those like the '90s era of Final Fantasy, and that's what makes it such a good game because you could tell they put so much heart and soul into this game. It feels like something you probably would have seen at Final Fantasy 1 through 4, but 3D and made like way later. It's like the motto for this game is like the crystal returns and the crystal comes back because Final Fantasy 6, 7, and 8 was such a departure from the fantasy aspect of it. A lot of those games had to do with tech. It was slowly leaning towards into sci-fi, and Final Fantasy 9 turned that around and made it like pure fantasy. It felt like a movie. It felt like a theater, like a play, if you will. That entire game felt like a play that you would have seen on your screen, and they lean into that a lot. They lean into that with the story and the characters. The characters are all very fleshed out. They all have very different personalities. Um, like my favorite character personally is Vivi because of his story of coming to terms with death, and he has to come to terms with the fact that he's going to die someday, and that's something I could relate to because I've had to do that. I've had to come to terms with the fact that one day I'm gonna be gone, and I'm not going to be able to see my family again, and it is a fear of mine, death, and that's why Vivi is one of my favorite characters. He has to deal with that, and of course, at the ending is very sad when it comes to Vivi. All the other characters are fun or serious. Zidane, Steiner, and Garnet, Aiko are all great characters, great fun characters, different personalities. Steiner at the beginning is kind of amp, but once you get to the end game, he becomes his own character and his own like. Of course, he still has that like little Steiner aspect to him. Like he is still uptight and overprotective of Garnet, but at the same time, he is able to let go and um, step back for a moment and see the bigger picture. Quina as a character, I didn't really enjoy it, but it didn't really matter. I think it makes for some really good comic relief at the end of the day. Freya had a tragic backstory and like a tragic story in general with Bradley and Bermesia, and then Amara was just cool. You could be kind of a jerk sometimes, but it was just cool. Um, as as with a lot of Final Fantasy games before this, it pertains to the classic ATB battle system. We have to wait until you get your turn. Even in between your waiting, somebody could attack you. And I think the progression with moves and gear and equipment was phenomenal. Um, that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed Final Fantasy VI so much because it felt so much like that. But I feel like this one did it a tiny bit better, but Final Fantasy VI did it really good as well. Yeah, that is the end of this quick review for Final Fantasy IX. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody. I'd probably give it like an 8 out of 10. Of course, I have my issues with it. I think the story I said it was great, but also has its moments where it can be kind of meh. But yeah, 8 out of 10 game. I would recommend it to anybody. And yeah, see ya.